Welcome, bienvenue. My name is Renee Ketchum, and I'm the cultural programming liaison of AFUSA, and I'm thrilled to be here with Melissa Sora and Isabelle Leroux, who is the president of AFUSA, to welcome best-selling author Cara Black, who will introduce us to her new book, Night Flight to Paris, that literally just came out today. AFUSA is the largest Alliance Française network in the world, helping 25,000 learners of French each year learn French, live French, and love French at the Alliance Française. We have quite a few wonderful national events coming up, so visit afusa.org and learn about our One Film, One Federation Quebec film coming up to celebrate La Francophonie. French All Around Us, Chef Alain Lenotre will come back again, and then a fabulous new book on Picasso and April in Paris with Oliver G. Just a few logistics and format. Please stay on mute during the presentation. Stay on speaker view. All questions, if you would, put them in the chat. And if for any reason you have technical issues, sign back in after a few minutes using the original Zoom link. This event is being recorded for our YouTube channel, and the total runtime will be 1 hour. So again, bienvenue to Cara Black. Cara is the author of 20 books in the New York Times best-selling Aimé le Duc series, as well as the thriller 3 Hours in Paris. Cara has received multiple nominations for the Anthony and Macavity Awards, and her books have been translated into German, Norwegian, Japanese, French, Spanish, Italian, and Hebrew. Cara lives in San Francisco with her husband and son and visits Paris frequently. So welcome, Cara. We are thrilled to be here with you on the day on March 7th when your book comes out, Night Flight to Paris. And welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Renee, and thank you everyone for coming, and thank you to Melissa for helping organize this, and to Isabelle and all of you again for coming. I'm so excited. This is the launch day of Night Flight to Paris, and it's a real thrill to write a follow-up to Kate Reese, who we met in 3 Hours in Paris. I'm getting them confused. So in this story, it's up to Kate Reese to take the shot that just might win or lose the war. So I'm really excited to explore her further missions.
So Cara, we'd love to just ask you a couple of questions about this brand new book. What is Night Flight to Paris about? Can you tell us a little bit about the book?
Sure. It's set in October 1942, and it features Kate Reese, an Oregonian who met and fell in love with a Welsh man named David in Paris in 1937. He was an engineer, and it was the summer before the war. It was when many things were possible, maybe peace. They got married. They went back to England, and because he was an engineer, the war started and he was sent up to the Orkney Islands near Scotland, and they had this beautiful baby daughter, Lisbeth. But what happened was a Luftwaffe bombing, and it killed her husband, David, and her baby daughter, Lisbeth. And Kate is just filled with revenge and wants to get back and do her bit for the war. She grew up in Oregon during the Depression. As a young girl, she learned to shoot with her father because they lived on a ranch. And, there would be a snowstorm. They needed to fix the fences. And as a young girl, she just learned to shoot because she had to defend the ranch, and there were predators, and she had to shoot game for food. She also had 5 brothers, which made her pretty strong and resilient. So Kate has found herself stranded in the UK, in the Orkney Islands, working in a munitions factory, unable to return to the US because of the U-boats. And she gets recruited by the British Secret Service because of her skill in sharpshooting. And this is 1942, and her handler, a British colonel, takes her aside and said, "I've got to send you back into France because a woman you know, Margot, who you trained with, is in trouble and needs your help, and she requested you. Now, Kate doesn't want to go back to Paris because she's wanted, and her, picture is all over the Kommandantur walls. But Margot saved her life, and so she feels obligated. So she's given a three-pronged mission to bring penicillin cultures to Paris for sick Jewish children who are hidden in the Pasteur Institute, which is based on a real story. Also to find Margot and help extricate her and take out a high-ranking German operative. So I can't tell you what happens, but she will meet sheiks and spies and poets and partisans, and you'll have to read the story.
I think all of us can't wait. What led you to write the story, and what was your inspiration for writing the book?
Sure. Well, I think it was because I've been reading some British female military historians, and they were writing about women's roles in the war. And many of them, well, one woman I specifically followed, had found some declassified files. Now it's 80 years after the war. And she was finding things about women's roles. And I was just so amazed to know that women did a lot of things. And I discovered too that Kate Middleton, who may be someday the Queen of England, Kate Middleton's grandmother was broke code and worked on code at Bletchley Park, the famous place where Alan Turing broke the Enigma machine. And Kate's grandmother, and she's very proud, she often talks about it, but I had no idea about this story. Kate's grandmother did her work. She signed the Official Secrets Act. And then her work, and then what happened was that the women were always called girls. They were never referred to as women. They were, even though they were really good with math and doing puzzles and crosswords, they were assigned the lowliest jobs. They never got equal pay as the men. And after the war, their names and their files were destroyed because they were thought to have, just be girls. And I thought how sad that those stories are lost. So I really wanted to explore women's stories, the untold stories in World War II. And what I keep thinking, especially this is Women's History Month, what about those books? Where are they? They should be on the shelves about these women who did these heroic acts, and we don't know about them. I think that sort of spurred me into writing this story, exploring secrets. That's always a great draw to me. Things during World War II that we don't necessarily know about. I had a cousin, well, he's a second cousin, my mother's first cousin, who was with the US Navy, the Luftwaffe, with the Air Force. And he was stationed in the UK, and he was a bombardier in those big planes that had the glass in the back. And they were on missions to Italy, bombing Italy. And I never knew about this until I grew up. And he never talked about it. But one day he woke up in the morning and he was really ill, and he couldn't go with his crew. They took off, on their mission to Italy. They never came back. So it turns out that he sort of had this incredible guilt about this, survivor's guilt. But of course, I never knew that growing up. And I think those stories and the things people never wanted to talk about intrigue me.
So you've touched on this a little bit, but what more specifically was happening in World War II at the time the story takes place?
Sure. Well, we talk a lot about D-Day, and of course we should. But I got intrigued, listening, hearing about my mother's cousin who was bombing Italy, and I was like, why would you be bombing Italy? Well, the little known theater, at least to me, of war was the North African campaigns, and the Allies were working on this Operation Torch, which was highly secret. It was basically to land in North Africa, take over Vichy, Morocco, and then go into Algeria and Tunisia, and then go up into Egypt, and go up no, before Egypt, go up into Sicily, into Italy, go up the boot to meet where D-Day, troops were landing. And it was really vital that they were coming up that way. And I really didn't know much about that. And there was so much subterfuge, and there were so many things going on. All of these campaigns had to be hidden. They were secret. It involved a lot of spies. And I thought, this is ripe, ripe for a story. Really, I don't know if any of you have read the book by Frederick Forsyth, The Key to Rebecca. It's a very old classic. It's wonderful. It's about that time. And I read that as a young girl. And I remember I loved the first line of this story. And the first line I've never forgotten is, "The last camel died at noon." That grabbed me because then I wanted to know more, what happened, what was going on. So I love stories that raise the question, and people, you wonder how people are going to survive, if they can survive, what kind of obstacles they'll, surmount. We have Rommel in the Desert Fox, there are all these campaigns. So that's sort of the time of this story.
So in what was it like to do the real research for a book like this? I mean, was it difficult? What was it like what kind of research did you have to do?
Well, research is the best part of my job because I have to go to Paris. So I have to go into the archives. I have to go to Cairo, things like that. But of course I couldn't go there in 1942, right? So, but I think there's something about going to Paris, maybe late at night, you turn a corner and it's even though Paris is a living, vibrant city, it's constantly evolving. There's parts of it that are just timeless. And I turn a corner and there's this building, maybe in the Marais, that, has lichen and pock marks, and you'll see a bullet hole in it, which came from World War II. And I just think about all the layers of history. So I really love that kind of exploring. I like being on the ground, walking the ground of whatever place I'm writing about, because then I think you can see, how the light falls, what it sounds like, and I feel that's really important to get in a story, the rushing sound of the water in the sewer, going into the sewers, them sweeping with those brooms, just, things that really could only happen in Paris. I go to the archives and spend a lot of time in the ones up near Saint-Ouen. And, what's great is that if you know where you're looking for, the period you're looking for, and you get your card and you request the items and you go the next day to get them, it's wonderful research. And one time I was going through some letters from someone and something else fell out of the file. And, that was misfiled, it happens. And I was like, this is fantastic. I'm going to use this in the story. I couldn't plan that, I couldn't even predict that. So sometimes you just, take those things as gifts and incorporate them in the story. Of course, it was from that time and it really fit. So yeah, I went to the Churchill War Rooms in London, and it really is left as it was at the end of the war. Maybe some of you have gone. It's just amazing. And it's so claustrophobic down there under London's busy streets. I've also gone to the Imperial War Museum, and they have a simulator where you go in like a big tube, and it's like it was bombing during the Blitz, which is still very scary. So there's a lot of ways for us to experience it. I listen to a lot of oral histories as well about people's experience. So I feel that's really important, and I really enjoy that. I really like that.
Well, it sounds as if you're passionate about the research. Has there ever been anything that completely took you by surprise while doing your research? Something that just came out of nowhere that was so essential to your writing?
Sure. Well, I was talking about Kate Middleton's grandmother, whose record was destroyed, but of course they knew about it because it was in her family. Well, I found a book by two sisters, and they were, and so when I read this book, it just opened a whole new idea for me, and it gave me a new character. But these two sisters, young women, were British, and in 1939, when the war started for the Brits, they both signed up, in women's roles. Now, women's roles were like the Wrens, and neither one of them, they each had to take the Official Secrets Act, never to talk about what they did, as everyone did. And they were both assigned to the signals intelligence, which is the military intelligence that works on codes and ciphers in radio transmission out in the arena of war, in the theater of war, like between troops, headquarters, and different battalions. And they used women to do that. And what happened was they both survived the war. They came back, and it wasn't until, I don't know, maybe early 2000s that the files, because they were military intelligence, were declassified. And the declassified files showed, and each sister got their own, and they're like, you were working in signals intelligence? Well, I was too. We were both working in it. We never talked about it. We were in different branches, different countries. And they wrote about, being young women working in signals intelligence. And it was just amazing. And I think that really surprised me and made it real, about women's roles, and nothing glamorous, but what it was like. And I just thought so interesting. They got married, they had children, they saw each other. And it wasn't until the files became declassified that they opened their mouths. So that was just thrilling. And so those kinds of things are also, like I said before, they're gifts. But I wanted to talk about, there was also a woman I met in Lyon, and she had the most beautiful complexion. When I met her in Paris, she was in her 90s, but we had coffee, and she just, beautiful complexion. And she said, "I'll tell you my story, Cara." So we sat down at that cafe, and she said, "Well, when I'm from Lyon, and when I was, during the war, my husband was taken as a prisoner of war. I had a toddler. My father ran a printing press, and I used to help him sometimes. So one day, with my toddler strapped to my back, on my bicycle, I went over to my father to see if I could help him. And he said, "I can't leave right now. It's too busy. Will you do me a favor? Will you take this package to a location?" Well, fine. So he gave her his package. He put, and she had several eggs that she'd been able to find. And so they put the package under the big basket and the eggs on top. Well, takes off. She's riding her bike to the outskirts of Lyon, and there's a German checkpoint. And so they looked at her, they saw the baby, they saw the eggs, and they're like, "Go on, go on, go on." She kept going, and she went to the location, and she was met by the maquisards, the maquis, the underground fighters on the outskirts, in the countryside. And so she said, "I have something for you." And they go, "We know, we're waiting." She takes up the eggs and hands it to them. They opened it up, and it was, of course, a bunch of guns. And I said to her, "Weren't you scared? What did you think? You had your baby on your back and whatever." And she goes, "Well," and what I didn't say or didn't ask her was, "How could your father have given you that?" Anyway, and she said, "Well, my husband was a prisoner of war. We didn't have much, but we had food, we had a roof. And I really hated seeing those Germans every day in my city and hearing their jackboots on the street. And I wanted to do something, and I could only do little things, but it really made me feel like I could do something." And I thought, yeah, that's ordinary people who became heroes, who did extraordinary things. They're not, she wasn't sabotaging trains or setting explosives, but she, did her defiance and her resistance in her way, which I'm sure there are so many untold stories like this. And, it merely made me think, what would I have done, and I hope that I would have stepped up to do something like that. So I think those kinds of things are really inspirational. And I think I really want to tell those stories if I can. Of course, it's fiction.
Thank you so much for that. What else can you tell us about the role of women in your book?
Well, the role of women was, again, they were, well, it was kind of deceptive because women, whether they walked on the streets, in Paris or they were in the countryside, they were very visible because the men were not there, right? Because the men were away for whatever, because they were fighting or they were prisoners or working in Germany. So the women were always there. They were running the households, maybe factories, cafes, working in factories, any business that they would take over. But they were also doing things that people would never suspect, because, with the male attitudes in those times, in the 40s, and how German men looked at, Hitler, thought women should be, what is it, Kirche, Küche, church, home, and cooking or something. Women had definite roles, the motherhood, churchgoers, cooking, keeping the home. The same with Marshal Pétain, in Vichy France. It was very much about women being the backbone, being the homemaker. But of course, women can do many things. We all know that we can multitask, right? So I think, it can be deceptive. You can smile at someone and you can do this and you can be doing something totally different, not necessarily militant, though there were women like that as well. Recently in France, Madeleine Riffaut, maybe you know that, the bande dessinée about the young girl, she's now in her 90s, who was a militant, partisan in Paris. There've been the whole bande dessinées about there, and I almost got to meet her. I got to her apartment. She lives in the Marais. She's in her 90s, but she wasn't well enough for us to talk. She was recovering from long COVID. But she was more of these, militant. She went out with a machine gun at Liberation. So I hope that answered some of your question.
Definitely. What do you want the audience here, and what do you want people to take away from this new book?
Well, can I read a quote for that? This is nothing that I wrote. Okay. This is written by Ya Gyasi in her book, Homegoing. We believe the one who has power. He is the one who gets to write the story. So when you study history, you must ask yourself, whose story am I missing? Whose voice was suppressed so that this voice could come forth? Once you have figured that out, you must find that story too. I love that personally, because who writes these books? Men. A lot of what we know about World War II came from military or, historians or fiction written by men. And so I really wanted women to have women's role to be highlighted more. And I hope I do that in this story.
Well, we're all going to find out as we read it this week. Another question that we were talking about earlier, what would people say if they saw the search history on your computer?
I'm really scared because lately I've been traveling a lot, and I really wonder, if the authorities looked at my search history, if I would get arrested, because they might find explosives, cyanide capsules, Gestapo torture techniques, little things like that, So it's funny because, as a writer, if you're not in the archives, you've got to Google things, or you've got to find a search engine and, go into the files. So yeah, I'm kind of hoping they don't check out my search history.
You're obviously on the radar or somebody's radar. We understand.
Probably.
what does the does the Alliance Française play a role in this book?
Well, yes, they do, and especially in 3 Hours in Paris, because Kate Reese, who we met in that book, and who features in this book, she was raised in a male family, 5 brothers, but her mother's sister lived in I think Medford, Oregon. So Kate got to spend the summers and have girl time with her aunt. And she loved doing that because her aunt ran a boarding house, rooming house. And one of the boarders was a French woman, a Parisian, who had been a World War I French war bride, who came over with her husband, and she married. And she, of course, he passed away. She ended up living in the pension and teaching French. And so Kate would get to stay with her, and she would start teaching her French with these really old French, textbooks that she had from before the war that she brought with her. And then she would teach Kate how to put on red lipstick. And Kate was just, this was the best thing. And so she was so inspired that she somehow got involved with the Alliance Française, got some textbooks, I don't know, and started helping teach her. They didn't have Zoom then, right? But she would teach herself French. She got a scholarship from the Alliance Française and was sent to Paris in 1937. So much of my books and Kate owe much to the Alliance Française. It's really a lifeline to people who are really interested in France. So it certainly was to Kate, and it gave her a new world, opened her eyes. So yes, very much, very important.
And the Alliance Française still continues to do that. That's why we're all here. We're still learning and opening our own eyes and figuring out and enjoying everything French. Let's take a look. If we can, if Isabel's still on the Zoom, we can. I see we have some questions in the chat.
No, we don't. We don't have any questions for now.
Here we have one here. From Anne-Laure. What character traits do you share with Kate, if any? Are you closer to Kate or M.A.?
Well, I'm probably closer to Kate because, Kate is 100% American, as I am. I think Kate is much more says it like it is, probably like I am. But I think what Kate wrestles with, which I forgot to talk about, but is in this story is trust. When I wrote the story and I turned it in my manuscript to my editor, she said, "Do you know what your theme is for this Kate story?" And I go, "I'm not sure." And she said, "Your theme is trust. This book is about trust, along with all these other things we've talked about." And she said, because just the nature of Kate's job is about, she's not a spy, but she's an agent, and she's sent into France in night flight to Paris. She's there in a disguise. She has this mission. She has to do these things, and she has to make or act well enough that people accept her, and in her persona, she's disguised as a Red Cross nurse, middle-aged, okay? So it's about, and what her handler tells her is trust no one. You're going into an occupied country. You don't know. Anyone could turn you in for any reason. Good people do bad things. Bad people do good things. So, for whatever reason. So she really, she wants to trust people. I think a lot of us do, but she knows she can't. And then at the end, of course, Philippe, who we have met in 3 Hours in Paris, appears in this book, the love interest. And there's a whole thing about trust with Philippe, because can she trust someone? She's not supposed to trust someone. What if something happens? And how hard, and how awful in a way, just to think if you were a spy or an agent, you can't trust anyone. How do you have a personal life? So she's constantly looking over her shoulder in this story. She meets people, she meets these poets in Paris, based on this real group, the FTP Moi. And I thought, how can they trust each other and accomplish their mission when they're not supposed to trust each other? So that's really important in the story.
And you have your it's not the introduction, but you have a few quotes just before part one where you quote Joseph Stalin as saying, "A spy should be like the devil. No one can trust him, not even himself." So I think we're all looking forward to reading the book. And let me see if we have any other questions in the chat. I don't see any. So I have not read. I've just started this one. Can the books be read separately, or does it make more sense to start with the first book? Are they written in a series, or can I start with Night Flight to Paris and then go back to the previous book with Kate?
They stand alone, even though they're follow-up. So yes, you totally can pick up this story and meet Kate Reese in 1942. It stands alone. And of course, you can read 3 Hours in Paris as well, because, that's how it is, right? You're somewhere, you pick up a story, you need to understand who the character is. So yes, you could read 3 Hour Night Flight to Paris, and hopefully you would stay up all night because this is a thriller. Okay, this is a thriller and it's fast paced. I like to think it's character driven suspense. You're wondering, is she going to make it? Who is real? Who's telling the truth? And like the Pasteur Institute that actually did hide Jewish children during the war. I found that out by going on a tour of the Pasteur Institute, which I mentioned in Murder at the Port of Versailles. So when I was researching and going there then, they told me this about the penicillin in World War II with the Jewish children. And I was like, whoa, that's for a Kate book. But, there's incredible stories. And I personally like to read thrillers, not all the time, but I love to have something that's fast paced and I can put myself in those shoes. And I hope the story is evocative of that time. And you feel that you're with Kate on the streets in Paris, the streets that are occupied by the Germans. And I don't know if many of you have been to the Hotel Lutetia in the very chic, across from Bon Marché. Those feature in the story. And the Hotel Lutetia at the time was the headquarters of the Abwehr, the German military intelligence. So of course Kate has to go there. Now it's like a super chic hotel and wonderful bar. So those landmarks are still there and they have quite an interesting history.
So you're describing your research, and it sounds to me very cinematic in terms of how you're listening and looking. Are there any films in the works for this particular? Is this a new series of books that you're writing, or?
I mean, I would hope it would be great, wouldn't it? It would be. Thank you. I think of it cinematically too. I see her running down that street, but the Amy Leduc books have been optioned, so cross fingers on that. So far, not Kate Reese, because what I heard also when I was doing research at a vernissage on the left bank, overheard in conversation, a woman was talking to her friend and saying, oh yeah, it was like, remember those blue lights during the war, always those blue lights. And I was saying, and so I said, excuse me, madame, but what do you mean? She goes, oh, well, they used to paint the street lights with blue paint to mute, to make it very dark because there was a curfew, right? And there was a blackout because during the war. And she said, we'd come home on the last metro, as young girls, and we'd be running out of the metro to get back home. And of course, we couldn't see a thing. And, we're always tripping on the curb, right? Because we can't see it. And then we'd be falling and tripping on the cobblestones because we can't see anything. And our legs were just black and blue all the time, totally bruised. So a lot of us we had no more makeup left, so we would wear tights, because our legs were all banged up. And she said, but nobody, I went, I had no idea. But of course, right? If you're trying to run home, at dark, and she said it was always so strange because they were these sort of ghostly blue lights, people would run into things on their bikes and, miss things. And just think about it, if our cities at night only had a dim blue globe. So, and the curfews and, the metro closed early. So, it was a different way of living during that time.
So we have a couple of questions that have just popped up. Barb has asked, is a new series underway?
Well, there's a new Amy Leduc out next year. So that would be I don't know if that's a new series, but new Amy Leduc set in the 19th arrondissement. I think the tentative title is Murder on the Canal. But when I talked to the group this morning, they said, is that in Amsterdam? I said, no, it's up at La Villette, and they go, oh, that would be nice, Murder at La Villette. So I ask you, what do you like, Murder on the Canal or Murder at La Villette?
What does our audience think? We should have a vote. I think Murder at La Villette would be
Villette.
So we have a couple of questions.
Okay, it's getting sure.
So here we go. Everybody's for La Villette.
Yeah.
So the next question, who from I can't read the person asking. Hang on, who influenced you as a writer?
Many people. Probably, regarding French books, I think Georges Simenon, the Inspector Maigret, because I read early ones, and I loved that. Talk about cinematic, stories of Inspector Maigret and going home on was it Boulevard Beaumarchais, where he lived with Madame Maigret. It's like elusive because there's no real number. I rode by on my bike many times, so it would be right here, but no, it's not, because there's no real apartment building with that number. But because it was evoking a certain time in Paris, and of course that's gone now. But I think that was my first influence. Then Léo Mallet, who wrote many of the Nestor Burma detective series, and I copied his thing of writing about, the different arrondissements. Nestor Burma, the private detective, investigates crime. I think he went to 12 or 13 arrondissements. So, and I thought that was such a great idea. And he had a map in every book. And I shamelessly have put a map in all my books. This is for 3 Hours in Paris, but in my Amy Leduc books, there's always a map. And I love, this is a map, 1942 Paris. We got a map of that time, but I love those. So I think he influenced me a lot, having the maps, having crime by arrondissement. And I really love those books. I don't know if some of you go back and, read a book, every so often I'll read a Maigret or a Léo Mallet, because I think they're amazing.
So continuing with questions, we have somebody who has determined a different title for your new book coming up, which is going to exist. The suggestion is Murder on the Saint-Martin Canal. So just to give you another idea for the title that you're looking for. And then
That's a good one.
Yeah. Sarah has asked, loved 3 Hours in Paris and excited about Night Flight. Did you know when you wrote 3 Hours that you would continue writing about Kate's adventures?
No, clueless. I've been writing the Amy Leduc books for about 19, 20 years. And the whole time I was writing them, doing the research for Amy, I was always hearing something, like that woman who was talking about the blue lights. I heard about that about 7 years ago, and I wrote that down. And I always thought, that's amazing. So I have all these little notebooks I get in Paris, and I jot down notes, of course, for research. But there just got to be so many about World War II or the war that I would just write those in a different notebook. And sometimes those little nuggets or tidbits would go in Amy Leduc book, but often they didn't. And I talked with my editor about that, and she said, it's great. Keep those. Someday you'll want to tell a story using those. And then I found this footnote, about 10 years ago, about Hitler who visited Paris for 3 hours. Famous photo. You've all seen that. I probably showed you before. There's Hitler with Arno Breker, his sculptor, and Albert Speer. We all know him, the architect, armaments director. And they both, I saw that in a book. They both wrote stories after the war, and each one gave different dates. They came, Speer said, I think June 28th, 1940. I think Breker said June 23rd, 1940. But you can see they're both with Hitler. And why were the dates different? And then when I saw the footnote, the visit was only 3 hours. Hitler left and never came back. I said, why? And I said, well, what if someone tried to take him out? And I talked to my editor, and she goes, there's your story. Why don't you write that? And I was really scared and nervous to do it because, I was so used to writing, but I try to make the Amy Leduc books fresh, but it was a new, very new to me. It would be exercising a different writing muscle. So with her support, I wrote it, and I couldn't believe I even finished it. But yeah, so there was no master plan, but I really found another story for Kate. So that is Night Flight to Paris.
Cara, I have a question for you. When you have the idea for your next book, how do you work? Do you start by the research? Do you write at the same time? But do you write when you're traveling, or do you write when you're back home? How do you work?
Well, if it's an Amy Leduc book, I start with the location. Where would Amy go? Why would Amy be here? What kind of crime happens here? Again, what does she have a job in this area because she's a private detective? What would be her connection? Who lives there? What would be organic? So I start with the place, and then I start with why would Amy be there? And then I start researching. But of course, when I'm in Paris, I'm researching. I don't write. I take copious notes. I interview people. I take photos. And I do a lot of groundwork, and then I come back and I start writing. And for the Kate books, well, it's fun to say plural there. I'm not used to saying that because this book is so brand new. I look at the research and I look at the time because, I think as Renee asked me, what was happening in the war? So what would Kate be doing in the war, given her sharpshooter skills? And what does that mean in the war? Where are we in the war? What is happening? And what's happening with secret intelligence? What's happening with the SOE? What kind of agents are being dropped in France or not? Or what kind of networks are there? So yeah, it kind of comes from a nugget in history, and then I can explore. So when I go in April, I will look at different things, possibly for the next book. Yeah, so that's kind of hybrid, if that answers your question.
Isabel, do we see any more questions in the chat? I think we've asked all the questions. Does anybody else have a question before we say thank you very much to Cara Black and start reading? Well, Cara, I think on the part of AFUSA, Isabel, I think we just like to thank her, Kate. Thank Cara so much.
Thank you so much, Cara.
The timing is wonderful.
Thank you.
International Women's Month. I think what you said about women in this period of time, I mean, I've read a lot about the Code Girls. I think what you said was very interesting about them always being referred to as girls. You know, they kept their lives secret for their entire lives until there's a lot of fascinating information from that period of history. And thank you so much for sharing this new book with us. And
Yes,
For
Renee,
sure.
Renee, we have a last question in the chat. Cara, it seems that you were at the Festival of Books in Tucson.
Yes.
So did you like it? How was your
Oh,
experience?
I loved it. Yeah, I just got back. I really loved it. It's really wonderfully run. It's staffed by volunteers. They have like 2,000 volunteers. It's a very author-centric. That was a new word I learned there. You know, they love authors. They, you know, pick you up at the airport. They're so thankful you come. You get to be on panels with other authors. So I got to be with mystery authors and I got to see people I knew, and it's great, you know, and it's all different voices. There's all kinds of writers. You know, you can go to the website and see who was there. Amazing people, amazing people. Even Bernie Saunders. I don't know why he was there. I guess he wrote a book. Gem, but it's really wonderful. It's held on the campus. The whole thing devoted. There's children's stages, there's science pavilions, there's all the fiction, there's poetry, a lot of memoir this year, a lot of women writing memoirs, and you know, tons of fiction. So it's just, I think it's one of the premier book festivals in the country. You know, the weather, we hit great weather, so it was wonderful.
So it was a
If you want to
fantastic
go to
experience.
one, I would
You would
recommend that one.
recommend.
It's wonderful. I would recommend it for sure. And you know, you can always, excuse me, go to my website, carablack.com, see what I'm up to, see where else I'm going in case you want to come, you know, meet in person. And I do lead trips to Paris, Amy trips, well now Amy and Kate trips. So we're going in April, but we're sold out. But if you're interested, you know, for next time, let me know.
Okay. There is another question. Do you have a vision for Amy in a film? Do you have a picture of her? Do you see her physically?
Yeah, I do. She's tall, she's thin, she has cheekbones, big eyes,
La Parisienne.
better dresser, yeah, very Parisienne, you know, looks very tousled but chic, you know, not me, totally not me, but yeah. And, you know, of course, she has that wonderful apartment, right, on the Ile Saint Louis. So, yeah, I can see her on the balcony looking out, you know. But yeah.
So you should do movie.
yeah. I see
Yes.
one more, Isabel, from your books are fantastic and the details amazing. Have you ever had an moment when researching?
Yes.
I have a lot of moments, sure. Each story has one. When I go, of course, you know, this would happen. Or often I get these aha moments when I'm walking and you know, I'm tired, my feet are starting to hurt, it's been a long day. And I realize, I turn on, I realize I'm lost, you know, I'm not where I was going. And I'm in this amazing area. You know, I just didn't know about it. I didn't know about this street. I didn't know that it went this way. I didn't know the canal went here or the, and I'm like, oh my God, this is incredible. And then I'm just like, yes, you know, it's like I discovered something new. But you know, that's, you all know, I'm sure, Paris is about walking, you know, and it's about discovering it, you know, turning a corner, smelling something. And what I have learned is to always look up, right? Look up and you'll see these amazing statues or, you know, carvings on the buildings or the balcony or the this or that. So that is something, you know, you look up and you go, oh, you know, so different here. Or, you know, there's just something new and different and amazing up there. So look up and don't trip.
Well, thank you so much. And how can we hear more? I'm not sure everyone here knew about these Aimé Leduc trips to Paris. Is that on your website?
It's on my website. Yeah, Amy Leduc, just go to travel tours. It should be there, one of the pages. And of course, we will do in April, the Amy tour, we're going to go, I don't have the book with me, we're going to do Kate's walk at the beginning with 3 hours in Paris. We'll start up in Montmartre and we'll just follow the map like Kate does. And then we'll have a day with Amy. And then we'll do a day with Kate down in Bon Marché, and over at the Lutetia. So it's really fun to have those kind of options. But yeah, it's on my website. It's, carablack.com. My friend is organizing the trip, which is wonderful because I can't organize those things. And she said, we're full, but, maybe next time in the fall or next spring, let us know, and we'll get it. We have a waiting list. So, it's really fun. Even if you're, and most people that come, most people that come on the trip, they know Paris, they've been to Paris. So it's a different kind of visit to Paris is what I mean,
So it's a discovery. You're going places. I mean, you're reliving the life of the character, but in places that you might not have discovered by taking that wrong turn that you talk about and finding something amazing.
Right. We go to the Paris of Amy. Amy discovers in the Sentier, Murder in the Sentier or wherever. Yeah. Yeah. It's fun. It's really fun.
Well, hopefully you'll have some
So-
new visitors, new people joining the trip from our group. Well, we're just coming to the end, I think. And Isabel, I think I don't see any more questions in the chat. Do you?
No, yes, there is one more.
keep
Cara, when you're running out of district for MA, what will be next for her?
That's a mystery. I don't know.
We don't know
I don't
yet.
know.
Okay,
I don't
we
know
will
yet.
wait. Okay.
Thank you for those great questions, really. And thank you, Isabel and Renee, and Melissa, who was here. I think all
Thank
of
you,
you,
Cara.
the Alliance Française. I just really, there's Judy. I'm Judy. Hi, Judy.
Yeah.
I meant to say hi, but I didn't get close enough. So if there's anyone else I know who I didn't say hi, excuse me. I can't see everybody, but Judy, I won't see you in Paris, I guess, but maybe next time. Okay.
Okay. So the recording will be available on our YouTube channel. So thank you so much, Cara. Thank you. It was a pleasure to receive you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again. And thank you everyone. And thank you, Alliance Française. It's
Thank you,
very,
everyone. And
very dear to my heart. Thank you.
enjoy the book.
We all will.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Bonsoir.
Bonsoir.